When the last box was carried out of her apartment, Clara realized silence could scream louder than any goodbye. The city she once adored now felt like an open wound. Every echo reminded her that she was no longer part of anyone's story. So, she drove north. Past the places that once held her laughter, past the faces that looked away when she fell. The road led her to the one place untouched by betrayal: her grandmother's seaside cottage. The air smelled of salt and old paint. She stepped inside, greeted only by dust and the slow hum of waves. It felt both like an ending and the quiet beginning of something no one would ever believe. That first night, sleep didn't come easily. The waves spoke in riddles against the shore, and every creak of the floorboards felt like memory returning to life. Clara wondered how something could feel so lonely and so sacred at the same time. She remembered the city lights, the laughter, the betrayal, and realized she had never truly listened to silence before. Beneath its weight, something began to breathe again, fragile but real. Morning came wrapped in fog. The air smelled of wet pine and forgotten summers. Clara made coffee on the old stove, each sound echoing in the empty cottage. When she stepped outside, the sea greeted her, not with fury, but with an almost knowing calm. It was as if it had been waiting for her to come back, or to finally listen. She wandered along the shore, shoes in hand, feet sinking into cold sand. The tide drew patterns like messages she couldn't yet read. When she looked up, the lighthouse beam cut through the fog. Steady, rhythmic, unwavering. For the first time in months, she felt something she couldn't name. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was something waiting to reveal itself. By nightfall, she found her grandmother's old easel stored beneath a tarp in the shed. When she set it up by the window, it felt like resurrecting a ghost. She touched the wooden frame, rough and stained with years of paint. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from memory. She didn't know what to paint yet, but for the first time since losing everything, she was ready to begin again. The second night brought wind and whispers. The cottage groaned as though remembering too much, and the waves crashed with restless rhythm. Clara woke suddenly, heart racing, certain she'd heard someone call her name. She rose, wrapped in a blanket, and stepped to the window. Out beyond the dark cliffs, the lighthouse flickered. Once, twice, then paused, as if it were speaking in code. For a moment, the beam cut through the mist and landed squarely on her window. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. The night felt alive with something she couldn't explain, or didn't dare to. She couldn't shake the feeling that the light was calling her. The next morning, she followed the rocky trail toward the cliffs, her boots crunching on frost-tipped grass. The lighthouse stood silent, a white tower weathered by storms and time. Its door hung slightly open, swaying in the wind. When Clara stepped inside, the air shifted. It smelled of salt, rust, and something faintly floral, like the perfume her grandmother used to wear. Dust swirled in the slanted light as if the space itself had been waiting for her return. Inside, time had stopped. The spiral staircase wound upward into shadows, and each step echoed like a heartbeat. Clara trailed her fingers along the iron rail, feeling the chill seep into her skin. Halfway up, she found something odd. A single dried flower pressed into the stair's edge, perfectly intact. Her grandmother had loved wild lavender. Clara paused, the ghost of memory brushing her like a whisper. At the top, the lantern room opened to the endless gray sea. The beam sat dormant, dust blanketing its glass. Clara stepped forward and placed her hand on the rusted railing, looking out at the horizon. For the first time, she saw her own reflection faintly in the lantern's glass. And behind it, the outline of someone else. A figure. A shadow that vanished the instant she turned. Her breath caught, not in fear but recognition, though she couldn't yet name why. When she returned to the cottage, Something had changed. On her easel, the canvas she'd left blank now bore faint brushstrokes, pale streaks of blue and gray forming what looked like the sea at dawn. She froze, brushes still clean, hands trembling. The air smelled faintly of lavender again. In the silence, the waves outside crashed once, twice, the same rhythm as the lighthouse flicker. For the first time, Clara didn't feel alone. Sleep abandoned Clara again. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the beam of the lighthouse and the faint strokes of color that appeared without her hand. When dawn broke, the painting had changed. What once looked like the sea now carried a figure. A woman standing on the cliffside, her hair flowing into the mist. Clara's heart ached as she recognized her grandmother's silhouette. The brushstrokes pulsed with memory, as though the painting itself breathed. She sat before it for hours, torn between awe and terror, realizing that whatever haunted this place wasn't trying to scare her. It was trying to speak. Clara began to paint again, not from imagination, but instinct. Every night she'd dream of the sea, and every morning her hand moved as if guided by an unseen presence. Images emerged. A girl with laughter in her eyes, a storm approaching, the beam of the lighthouse cutting through darkness. Each canvas felt like a confession from the past. Yet she couldn't decipher what it wanted her to know. The more she painted, the more she felt herself unraveling into something honest, something lost long ago. By the fifth painting, Clara noticed something uncanny. The faces in her art began to shift. The woman on the cliff turned, slightly each morning, her gaze inching closer toward Clara's own. And then one evening, a second figure appeared beside her, a young man. His features were sharp, familiar. It was Daniel, her former fiancé. Her pulse quickened, memories of betrayal flooding back. But the painting didn't accuse. It only stared, calm and silent. She touched the drying paint with trembling fingers and whispered, "Why are you here?" That night, wind battered the windows and thunder rolled across the cliffs. Clara's candles blew out one by one until only the lighthouse beam remained, sweeping across her walls like a slow heartbeat. She heard the whisper again. Soft, melodic, almost maternal. She followed it outside, barefoot through the rain, until she stood before the crashing waves. The light above turned once more, pausing over her as if waiting. She whispered back, her voice barely audible over the sea. "I'm listening." When morning arrived, Clara found her newest painting complete, though she hadn't lifted a brush. It showed her standing at the cliff's edge, rain falling, the sea roaring beneath. But in the painted sky above her stood her grandmother's face, peaceful and radiant. At the bottom corner, in faint brushstrokes, a message shimmered in drying paint. "You were never abandoned." Clara pressed her palm to the words, and for the first time in years she wept, not from loss, but from something she'd forgotten how to feel. Belonging. News travels strangely in small towns. Within a week, whispers of the woman who paints ghosts by the sea reached Port Hale. Locals who once turned their backs began driving the long road to her cottage, curious, skeptical, haunted by guilt. The first to arrive was Mrs. Alder, the grocer who once refused to serve her after the scandal. She came holding flowers, trembling with something between apology and fear. Clara met her at the door, calm, distant, her eyes as still as the ocean behind her. "You've been painting," Mrs. Alder said softly. Clara nodded, stepping aside. "Would you like to see?" Inside, Mrs. Alder's breath caught. The walls were lined with paintings, faces she recognized, places from memory, even her own small shop painted in loving detail. "How did you?" she began, but her words broke as she saw one painting in particular. A portrait of her late husband smiling by the sea. "I didn't," Clara said softly. "It just appeared." The woman's tears came before she could stop them. "He used to come here for fish," Mrs. Alder whispered. "He said this place was alive." Clara smiled faintly. "He was right." Soon others followed. Old friends, distant cousins, faces that once turned away. Each came under the pretense of curiosity, but their eyes carried shame. And for each of them a painting waited, finished before they arrived, hanging quietly as if it had known they were coming. Clara said little. She simply let them stand in silence, recognizing pieces of themselves in colors they didn't remember painting. The air in the cottage thickened with something unspoken. Forgiveness, wordless, heavy, and healing. Then one afternoon, Daniel appeared. He didn't knock. He stood in the doorway looking smaller than she remembered, his eyes hollow, carrying the weight of years. "Clara," he began, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to say." She studied him for a long time, the man who had left her to drown in rumors, who hadn't defended her when the world turned cruel. "Then don't," she replied softly. "Just look." She led him to a painting that hadn't existed that morning. Two figures standing apart on a cliff, the tide rising between them. "You can't undo what you broke," she said, "but you can stop pretending it never happened." Daniel stayed longer than expected, silent before the painting that mirrored his guilt. When he finally turned, his eyes were wet. "I didn't believe you," he said, "and I should have." Clara nodded once. "We all see the truth too late." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "The light doesn't judge, Daniel. It only shows what's been hidden." Outside, the lighthouse beam swept slowly across the cliffs, pausing for a heartbeat on the cottage window. This time, Clara didn't look away. Neither did he. After Daniel left, the cottage felt different. Not emptier, but lighter, as if it had exhaled something long held in its walls. The air smelled of sea salt and lavender again. That night, Clara walked to the cliffs. The lighthouse beam moved slowly across the dark water, steady and patient. She whispered into the wind, "I forgive you," unsure if she was speaking to Daniel, to herself, or to the ghosts that had carried her this far. The moment she spoke, the beam paused and brightened, casting a silver shimmer across the waves. It was as though the light itself had been waiting for those words. The next morning, Clara woke to find every painting in the cottage transformed. The faces were the same, but their eyes now looked outward, toward the sea, instead of inward toward her. The woman on the cliff smiled faintly, her expression peaceful. Even Daniel's reflection in the painting seemed lighter, free. Clara stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by what felt like a chorus of farewells. The light coming through the window painted her in soft gold. And she realized something profound. These weren't ghosts. They were memories, given one last chance to breathe. For days, Clara painted without sleep. The lighthouse beam no longer frightened her. It became her rhythm, her heartbeat. Each brushstroke came faster, freer, until colors bled together into something alive. When she finally stopped, the final canvas showed not ghosts, nor sea, nor storm, but a woman standing in sunlight, smiling at herself. The message beneath was clear, painted in trembling but certain strokes. "You are found." That evening, Clara walked to the lighthouse once more. Its door was still ajar, swaying with the wind. Inside, everything felt cleaner, brighter. The dust gone, the air lighter. At the top, the great lantern hummed softly, steady and alive. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the glass. In its reflection, she saw her grandmother again, smiling faintly, lips moving though no sound came. Clara closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." When she opened them, the reflection was gone, but the light remained, stronger than ever. As night deepened, Clara stood outside the lighthouse, the beam sweeping over her once more. It no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a promise. She turned toward the town's distant lights flickering across the bay, The same people who once whispered her name with pity, now speaking it with reverence. The wind wrapped around her like a blessing. "I'm still here," she whispered. The sea answered in rhythm with the light, and for the first time her name felt whole again. The storm came without warning. It roared in from the Atlantic with a force that shook the windows of the cottage. Clara stood at the door, watching waves rise like dark mountains. The lighthouse's beam cut through rain and spray, steady but strained. Something in her chest told her this storm wasn't meant to destroy. It was meant to deliver. And then she saw it. A piece of driftwood washed ashore, tangled with ribbon. The sight pulled her outside into the fury, her heart pounding, rain slicing her face as she ran toward the water. She fell to her knees in the wet sand, pulling the driftwood closer. Attached to it by waterlogged twine was a small glass bottle, sealed tight with wax. Inside, a folded note glimmered beneath the lightning's flash. Her trembling hands worked the cork loose, the wind howling in her ears. She unrolled the paper, squinting through rain and tears. The ink had bled, but the words were unmistakable, written in her grandmother's delicate hand. "You are the light, Clara. Always were." The storm raged on, but Clara no longer felt fear. The letter trembled in her hands, fragile yet unbroken. A message carried by the same sea that once mirrored her grief. She looked toward the lighthouse, its beam unwavering despite the tempest. She understood then that this wasn't a haunting, nor even a miracle. It was a reminder. Light isn't given, it's carried. It survives through those who refuse to let it fade. When dawn finally came, the world lay washed and new. Clara walked the beach, her footprints the only mark on untouched sand. The storm had taken the old pier and torn the shutters from her cottage, but it had left the lighthouse untouched. She looked down at the letter in her palm. The ink faded, but the words still legible. Her grandmother's voice echoed softly in her mind, blending with the rhythm of the tide. "You are the light." Clara smiled, realizing that the sea hadn't taken anything from her. It had returned what she'd forgotten to keep. That evening she placed the letter inside the lighthouse lantern, tucking it between the glass and the old brass frame. "You carried the light for me," she whispered. "Now I'll carry it for someone else." As the sun dipped below the horizon, she turned the mechanism, and the beam ignited, steady, golden, alive. From the cliffs above, the town's distant lights blinked in answer, as though the world itself had heard her promise. Weeks passed. The town changed, subtly but surely. People began visiting the lighthouse again, not to whisper about the woman who had been shunned, but to find their own quiet forgiveness in her paintings and her presence. Clara welcomed them, though she never spoke much. Her peace spoke for her. But one morning, while cleaning the glass of the lantern, she noticed something impossible. Faint words etched into the inside of the lens, glowing only when the sun struck it just right. It read, "The light remembers you." Her breath caught. Somehow she knew it wasn't just a message, it was an answer. That evening, Clara lit the beacon earlier than usual. The sea below shimmered like a mirror, and gulls circled as though sensing the moment. As the beam swept across the horizon, she felt it move differently. Slower, deliberate, pausing as it reached the cliffs where her grandmother's cottage once stood, before the storm took part of it. The air vibrated faintly, a low hum resonating through the glass. And then she heard it. Her name carried faintly through the beam itself, not in sound, but in feeling. "Clara!" She closed her eyes and let the light move through her, warmth filling every empty corner that once held sorrow. "I'm here," she whispered into the air, her voice trembling but sure. The hum deepened, gentle and rhythmic, like a heartbeat syncing with her own. For a fleeting moment she saw her grandmother's face again, not as a ghost, but as light, infinite, kind, and smiling. Then it faded, leaving behind nothing but radiance. Tears fell freely, though none were of grief. She understood now. She had never been forgotten. She had only been found in another way. When the next morning came, the sky over Port Hale blazed brighter than anyone could remember. Fishermen swore the lighthouse beam had stayed lit all night, steady as the stars themselves. From the village pier, Daniel stood watching, his heart heavy, but grateful. In the window of the lantern room, high above, he could just make out a silhouette. Clara, motionless, peaceful, her figure framed in golden glow. He whispered her name once quietly, as though afraid to disturb a prayer. The wind carried it back as a single word from the cliffs. Light. That night, the light from the lighthouse reached farther than ever before. Sailors miles offshore claimed it cut through the fog like a living thing, pulsing gently, almost breathing. In Port Hale, people said it felt warmer, that standing beneath it was like being remembered. And in the keeper's logbook, beside Clara's name, someone, or something, had written one final line in faint lavender ink: Keeper Eternal. The sea was calm, the air was still, and though no one saw her again, every night the light turned, steady and faithful, just as she once had been.